Hello, Must Readers. I'm Erin Popelka. I founded Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. And I am so delighted to be here today with Nicole Meier. Nicole, thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm so happy we got to get together.
Oh my goodness. And Nicole is being incredibly gracious. We are actually meeting in her home. So Nicole, a little bit about Nicole. She is a native Southern Californian who has since relocated to the Pacific Northwest, where she lives with her husband, 3 children, and a very nosy Aussie Doodle. Thank you. Yes, so good. Who is not being nosy at the moment. We have a very quiet house, which is a beautiful thing. She is the author of The House of Bradbury, which is her first novel, which we've got right here. We can show off this beautiful book. And her second novel, which comes out in September 2018, is The Girl Made of Clay. So thank you. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Yeah, of course.
So let's start way at the beginning. Like, tell me about some of your early writing. Like, when did you get bit by the writing bug?
Oh my gosh. You know, my story is funny because I wrote a lot as a kid, would make up little newspapers for the family to read, and I definitely wrote short stories all the time, but I didn't know that that meant I was a writer. I really didn't even know when I was in college and I was still writing a lot of short stories that meant I was a writer. I just, for some reason, thought everybody did that, and I didn't think there was anything special to it.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So I've loved it. I've always loved it. I've grown up reading a ton, but I just didn't know that was my thing.
So tell me about these newspapers you made for the family. I don't want to pass over that. That sounds fascinating.
My girlfriend and I growing up would definitely have notebooks all the time, and we would call it spying. Like, we would spy on people and take notes, but then we would make little stories out of it, and I would go home and make bigger stories out of it, and sometimes I would make newspapers like a story of the day, and I just remember doing that from when I was really little.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I love it. I love it. Would you illustrate it too, or was it mostly just the stories?
No, I don't think I would illustrate it. Yeah.
Oh,
a lot of writing.
That's great. And then even through college, writing short stories, because I feel like so many people I talk to, they do this writing and they want to claim the title of writer, but it feels like this big thing that they take on. For you, it just didn't even occur to you. It was just this thing you did.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
It's funny because I just recently got together with a girlfriend from college, and I hadn't seen her in years, and she said to me, "Of course you're a writer. You were always doing that." And it was kind of shocking to me because I kind of kept it secret, and I didn't realize people knew how much I was writing. My laptop had, remember those laptops with the floppy disk?
Of course, I do.
I had a lot of short stories on there, and I, of course, took creative writing in college. That's what I studied, but I just, for some reason, didn't think that I was ever going to write a book or that I was good enough to write a book. It's hard. You got to really, get a lot of courage to put yourself out there. So it took a long time.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for finding that courage, for putting
you.
yourself out there. Let's start by talking about The Girl Made of Clay, this beautiful book I am holding in my hands. Tell me about the book.
The book is inspired by some events of my past. It's definitely not autobiographical, but it is inspired by a few things. So when I was really young, my parents were very into the arts. We lived in Laguna Beach, California, and when I was about 6 years old, my mom was volunteering at the Laguna Beach College of Art and Design, and it burned down.
Oh my gosh.
It was mostly the administrative building, but it was a very serious fire, and she put me in the car and took me up there the day that it burned down, or maybe the day after, and I will never forget that. Just seeing artwork seared and the charred black ash everywhere and the smell of it.
Oh my gosh.
It stayed in my brain. It still does. There was one of my first experiences with something burning down, and just my first experience thinking, this is someone's artwork that is no longer here. So the story, fast forward, is about a grown daughter who has an artist father. He's a sculptor, and he has a massive fire go through his art compound. So she's forced to take care of him. And it's sort of, how do they work on forgiveness in their relationship, and him choosing art over family, and just kind of that dynamic.
Oh, fascinating. Fascinating. And so interesting that kind of starting point is something that you already experienced. Yeah. Because so much of the fine arts are incredibly physical and incredibly tactile. You know, we're lucky with books that they can be online and digital now. And, if you lose a copy of the book, you don't lose the whole thing.
Right. Not back then.
But for sculpture and paintings, and that's the piece. Wow. Oh, very, very rich. And so The Girl Made of Clay is your second novel.
Yes.
And so having been through the ringer now, this is number 2, what surprised you about the writing of this as your second novel?
Oh gosh, so totally different writing styles. My first book, I was definitely a pantster, so I had no plan whatsoever.
Translation, writing by the seat of your pants. So like no outlines, just like, let's see where this goes.
Completely.
Yeah.
I mean, I had no, I can go into that story later, but I had no clue what I was writing about. I just felt compelled to write the story. So I would sit down every day and just write anything. The new character would just come and I had no plot written out. And then this book with The Girl Made of Clay, I had a lot more experience under my belt, and I knew that I should probably do some plotting and some outlining, and I was a little more organized. And I feel the more any writer writes, the richer your vocabulary, the more you evolve. So I feel like my writing hopefully will get better and better with each book. So.
Oh, fantastic. So tell me about the House of Bradbury. Tell me about your first novel.
So my first novel, well, the first novel was published. I have one in the drawer that was a practice novel.
Don't we all? Excellent. Which is good. Thank you for putting in that time.
Yeah.
So the first published novel, your debut.
First published novel.
Yes.
I had no intention to write that book. I was actually working on something else entirely. I opened up the Los Angeles Times because I'm from Southern California. And even though I live in the Pacific Northwest, I still kind of read the news from my old hometown. And I saw an article that said, for $1.5 million, Ray Bradbury's house could be yours. Wow. And so he had passed away. His family had given up the house and put it on the market. And there was photos. Actually, the first article just had an exterior photo. And I just stopped what I was doing and was enraptured because I love Ray Bradbury.
Yeah.
I certainly never thought I would write a story about his house, but I stopped and I started investigating the house and looking at online photos of the interior and the backstory. He had lived there for 50 years. Wow. And I said, there's a story there.
Yeah.
So I envisioned, it's fictional, I envisioned a writer moving into his house and taking it over. So that was the book. And I had no clue I was going to write it. It came to me very quickly. It was just a mad writing experience, but I loved it. And I learned so much more about Ray Bradbury, and I just have so much respect for him and as an artist. And so it was really fun to write. And I've heard from a lot of his fans and friends and family, and that was really helpful because I was nervous to put it out there, you know. But everyone's been super supportive. So.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That is a little bit risky too, to sort of use this literary icon.
Oh, so risky.
Author of Fahrenheit 451, The Martian Chronicles, some of the bigger ones. Yes. And then to use that as your creative space through the House of Bradbury. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you heard back from them when the book came out?
Yes, I heard from through my representation. We sent the book to one of his daughters, and she sent back a really nice note saying this is a sweet tribute to my dad, so I felt okay about that. And I heard from some of his friends. I heard from his personal driver who drove him most of his adult life. He shared some stories with me. Someone sent me a chunk of Bradbury's house, and I have it framed in the other room.
Yeah, that's so exciting.
So I heard from a lot of people. I've heard from someone who spoke at his funeral. So people just said thank you for keeping the memory of the house alive, and that made me feel good because I really wanted to represent it in the right way. But I also wanted to put my own spin of women's fiction in there and my own story, which is not everybody's story, but I just loved the whole idea of someone else inhabiting the place.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Well, thank you for doing that, because now it's a journey that we all can go on too through the book, which is so great. And so both of these books, kind of through the sculptor dad in The Girl Made of Clay, and through this like presence of Ray Bradbury in the House of Bradbury, really kind of nuzzle up to some like creative genius and some strong creative energies. And so what was it about like that energy, like that kind of drew you to like pull that into both of your books?
That's such a good question. I haven't thought of that before, but I think the arts have always been in my life. My dad is no longer living, but when I was little, he had a pottery studio on the property where we lived, and so I do have a lot of memories of being in there with the clay and watching him be. He only sculpted for a hobby, but he really liked it. My grandma was a great artist. She sketched a lot and she painted. She was not famous or anything, but she was just great in my eyes because I loved my grandma. And then my parents supported the arts. So I feel like sort of the writing and artist background maybe just has been lingering in my subconscious my whole life. And I'm always drawn to it. I just think that artists lead such interesting lives, and I always want to know more. So I think that's why it's been the center of my books.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. And I do always love too, like learning about different people's creative processes.
Yes.
And like one of my favorite stories that Ray Bradbury tells is how when he was the early days of writing, he stumbled into this room in the basement of the UCLA library where there were a dozen typewriters and you could rent them for 10 cents for a half an hour.
Yes.
And so he found this, went to the bank, got like a bag full of dimes and like I don't know if this is true or not, but I imagine this like stack of dimes that was like his day's work, and he would plunk it into the typewriter, and that's how he originally wrote the story that ultimately became Fahrenheit 451. And so tell me about more of your creative process. Like, what are some of the pieces that factor into like your writing?
Okay, so my writing is always because of an image. That's how I got the Bradbury story, was the image of his house in the newspaper.
Sure.
And that sparked the whole story for me. The Girl Made of Clay was sparked from a couple things. The image of the fire at the college in my brain, the art college, and then also the images of the Pacific Northwest that I have because I live in the Pacific Northwest. So I vision board. I actually get a big bulletin board, but before I write each story, I put up pictures of all the things that I see in my head or I've seen, physically, and then I use that. So I always am returning to something visual while I'm writing, and I keep that vision board up the entire time until the book goes on the shelves, and then I rip it all down and I do a new one. So that's kind of my process, just in terms of inspiration and making sure I'm staying true to my vision that I'm seeing.
Absolutely. And does that help with description? Because you actually have this thing you can see and these colors, and then from there it's not hard to imagine what it would smell like and sound like and those sorts of things. Yeah,
so in The Girl Made of Clay, I don't want to give too much away, but the father's artist compound is up on a high cliff above, the Oregon coast is so rugged and very dramatic. So his house is actually a picture I found on Pinterest of this crazy house perched on a cliff with these big waves and really craggy rocks. And so I deferred to that every time I was writing about the house. Like, what would it feel like to live there? And that was on my vision board. So,
oh my gosh. It sounds like that house is almost a character in the book.
Oh, the house is so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, well, that is so great. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that glimpse of your process. That's fantastic. And so many of the people with must-read fictions are mothers and grandmothers and parents, grandfathers, fathers. And so I'd love to just talk a little bit more. So you are a mother of 3. Yes. So how does reading and writing factor in with your family?
Oh, very carefully. It's hard. I mean, there's so many writers out there that can relate to this, but when you're writing, especially writing from home, no matter if you live with a pet or a family, it is difficult because I like to be very quiet. I get easily distracted, so I don't like a lot of noises. So it's hard. I mean, my poor family, I shush them all the time, but you have to find those moments of quiet. So when I wrote these past 2 books, I would wake up at 5 a.m. and write for a couple hours before anyone got out of bed, and then get everybody going for the day, and then come back to it. By nighttime, I can't think straight, so I don't write at night. I know some writers do, but I can't do that.
Sure. Absolutely. It does seem like kind of carving out that quiet time and carving out that space that's like, kind of there, and the muse shows up because you showed up, and so making sure that that's just that daily practice happening.
Yeah, and sometimes the muse does not show up.
It's true. It's true. And that's why writing gets a bad rap, because there's definitely a slog as part of it too. Yeah, indeed.
But if you do sit in the chair, something will come. It might not be pretty, and it might be something that you edit out later, but if you sit in that chair, something will come.
Excellent. So, yes, fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you for sitting in the chair. Thank you for the 2. We will do, again, these beautiful books, The House of Bradbury and The Girl Made of Clay. So, Nicole Meier, thank you so much for talking with me, and thank you for these 2 beautiful books.
I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.